Well, hello from the drollery of social isolation. I could use a bit of a pick-me-up in this laggardly time, so I think I'll talk about something that excites me. How about Myrkur's new album, Folkesange? Because, boy, do I have a lot of opinions there. So let's establish a little context here. I was a senior in college when I needed some mood music for a writing project and stumbled upon Scandinavian folk music, and I was hooked. It set its talons into me and clutched at my heart, or, whatever analogy you feel like using. Anyway, that's why I discovered Myrkur, the Danish folk and black metal project by Amelie Brun. Myrkur is known in part for being somewhat controversial on the metal scene, but I'm not here to talk about that because I see a lot of people talking about her from a metal perspective, so I want to come at it from a folk perspective, because that's where I'm coming from. Also, last month she released her first straight folk no metal album, fittingly called Folkesange. Fun fact, I tried shooting this video before, and for a number of reasons it didn't work out, and one of those reasons was I was mispronouncing the name of the album the whole time. I went through and I got all the pronunciations, I think, right for everything, except I didn't even bother to check what the name of the album is supposed to sound like. In fact, while we're at it, let's make a Myrkur's Folkesange pronunciation guide, because whenever I see someone reviewing something non-English, almost always they say, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this word. So you're just going to deny someone's name, worried you're going to mess it up? Just try it, or even better, research it. Anyway, jumping right in. The album is by Myrkur. The album is called Folkesange. The songs are Ella, Fagersommen Rose, Leaves of Yggdrasil, Ramund, Tori Helheim, Svea, Harpens Kraft, Gammelschering, House Carpenter, that one's totally English, Rayar, Gudernesfilia, and Winter. Now, obviously, I'm your classic American Anglophone, so take that with a grain of salt, but it should be enough to be going on. Anyway, where were we? I'm not sure, but I could use a cup of tea. We have an electric kettle now, so super fancy. Anyways, Folkesange came out. I was ready for it. Grabbed my best headphones and I strapped on my most thematic Norwegian sweater and took a nice little listening walk. In fact, a great way to describe this album is it's perfect for taking a walk on a hill when it's windy and rainy and all dramatic outside. And that means the tea's done. I do love it when the tea is done. Also, how do you like the millennial chic mug that my dear sister gave me? She's great. Let's go outside. As with any album, the first part of the experience is the album art. In this case, it's a very pretty painting of a girl in Scandinavian folk dress walking along the fjord while knitting. Now, when I see that album art, I surely think about Scandinavian folk, but my mind goes to maybe bright fiddles and a nice peppy dance rhythm, which clashes a little bit with the very dark and ominous tone of the opening track, Ella. So at first I was a little unconvinced by the choice of artwork here, but then Myrkur posted about it on Instagram. She posted a photo of herself, pregnant with her son Otto at the time, in front of the painting. And the caption reads thusly: "With Otto in my belly the day we photographed the Hans doll painting. This painting hangs in my living room. It has been in my family for generations, and I inherited it from my grandmother. My mother used to tell me that it was me in the painting, and I've always had a strong connection to it. It feels very full circle to have it as my album cover for Folkesange." So my cat's meowing at me to come inside. Do you have something to say there? Stick your head down again, that was very cute. I think we're gonna have to put a cut right here. Anyway, I just thought that was a really nice backstory to the album art, and it also shows in a nice way how this album seems to be a lot about Myrkur's personal relationship with the tradition. So it kind of turned out to be the perfect album art for this project. As if it wasn't already stupid obvious from her folk-infused metal or her general aesthetic, Myrkur makes it very clear on Folkesange that she is enamored with the Scandinavian folk tradition. Half of the songs on the album are old traditional folk songs. If you're curious to hear how other people interpreted these songs, I made a Spotify playlist you can check out if you want. Tragically, Spotify in the USA doesn't have some of the recordings that directly inspired Folkesange, so, oops. Myrkur also has a nice way of incorporating some of the quirks of traditional Scandinavian music into the original songs on the album. For instance, in the opening track Ella, there's this kind of weird rhythm thing. So if you count it out, it sounds like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the the rest of the song pretty much is in 3. So the rhythm isn't held to a grid, but more is about supporting the contour of the melody. It's less rhythmically based and more melodic based. Another quirk of folk music in places like Scandinavia is you will occasionally find microtonal notes. Notes that you can't play on a piano because they're kind of in between the keys. And Myrkur uses this on the song Gudrun's Vilja, which at a point goes something like da da dee da 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 da. And that note you can't play on the piano because it's in between notes. The notes on the piano would be or, but it's just a little bit flat. And I can only play it on this because I'm a nerd and I've got an instrument that can play some microtonal accents for just that sort of occasion. The problem is it doesn't sound as good on this because if you're doing it on a voice or a fiddle, you can hit the note just slightly off, then play with the tuning and do a little sort of sweet bend to it. And Myrkur does that on the record, so, you know, listen for that. Gudrun's Vilja, first verse. Keep your ears open. As influenced as Myrkur may be by traditional music, she still seems to be playing by her own rules on Folkesange. Half the album is traditional songs, but the other half are all original compositions. Myrkur is exercising her own songwriting. There's a lot of classical sounds, like pianos and low cello-y strings. There's also lots of like reverby and delay kind of modern elements to it as well. Also, the musicianship on Folkesange is fairly restrained, whereas lots of Scandinavian folk albums will have blazing fiddle riffs and dance tunes that just make your feet start bopping. Nary a polska to be found on Folkesange, a complete lack of blazing riffs. That's okay, it's focused more on the songwriting and the vocal performance. Thanks for bearing with me so far, by the way, trying out a little something new with this format. Thought I'd do something a little analytical. This video's been jumping around because I've been trying to cram in shooting and spare little hours over the weekend. It's been a very busy weekend for me because the social isolation thing is here and my dad's a priest, so all the Easter services we've had to live stream, do all the service music. Now it's Monday, I've got a little more free time, so I'm going to talk about pagans now. How about that for a transition? So Folkesange isn't a strictly traditional album, and it sure as hell isn't metal, but it does play really nicely in the world of pagan folk music, with bands like Faun or Vardruna, bands that have a strong emphasis on folklore or pre-Christian Germanic beliefs. You see this mythological angle, for instance, in the traditional songs that Myrkur puts on the album. For instance, Harpen's Kraft is a classic Scandinavian ballad wherein a woman falls into a water spirit's river and drowns in his clutches, and then her lover is like, "Fetch me my golden harp." And then he plays that harp so beautifully that he can save his woman from the clutches of this water spirit. Or there's Ramund, that tells the story of Ramund the Young, who I guess is a young guy who killed a bunch of giants or trolls or something, single-handedly. Also, while we're talking about it, young Ramund would be a great name for a Scandinavian mythology-themed rap alias. Pagan themes run through all the original songs on the album, too. I mean, we got Gudrun's Vilja and Thor i Helheim, which I'm pretty sure mean the will of the gods, and Thor in Helheim. And, the one song she wrote in English for this album is called Leaves of Yggdrasil, Yggdrasil being, of course, the great big life tree that holds all the worlds and its branches in Norse mythology. Also, I have a cup of tea now because screw continuity. And also, my keymar ran out of space, and I don't know when because I've just been sitting here rambling along, so I apologize if something's missing. Well, it looks like I did miss a noteworthy bit here. I just wanted to point out that if you look at the actual lyrics, it doesn't seem that Myrkur is just telling some kind of mythology fantasy stories. She's mostly writing in Danish, but underneath the music videos, she puts English translations, and some of it reads more like religious poetry. For instance, you have lines in the opening song Ella that talk about like an ocean wave baptism, or the strength of the sun inspirits you. Then there's the line that goes something like, "The goddess of fertility had heard my song." Given that Amelie Brun, the woman behind Myrkur, recently became a mother, one can't help but wonder if that's more of an earnest utterance than just, creative poetry. Of course, this is all conjecture, and I'm speculating wildly about the innermost thoughts of a Danish woman who I've never met. But that's the thing about this album, is it feels like such a personal expression on Myrkur's part that one can't help but evaluate it along those lines a little bit, you know? But if we run the assumption that it is earnest religious poetry, it makes for a good story. There's tons of Scandinavian folk songs about monsters and water spirits and magic and stuff, but any actual religious music from the pagan tribal days have kind of been kicked to the curb through centuries of religious and political landscaping, if you will. So it's really interesting to see someone sort of reverse engineer a tradition there, if you will. I say "if you will" a ton in this video. There's just something about being on camera that brings that phrase out in me. I don't know what it is, but I guess we're all just gonna have to deal with it. Anyway, lyrics aside and musically speaking, Folkesange fits in really well with other northern pagan folk albums. I really don't have much experience with this genre, but they seem to have an affinity for a kind of dark sense of ambience, especially the Scandinavian bands. And there's something about pagan folk music that I can't quite put my finger on, but I'll give a crack at it. It seems to me that traditional music is often about dancing or storytelling or musicianship or group expression, whereas pagan folk music seems to be about having some kind of relationship with this music that's a very kind of modern, relational sort of... I'm rambling and conjecturing again, but I feel like there's something in there if I were to do the research. I don't know. There's also something about the production style of this album that feels like other pagan folk music to me, and that probably has a lot to do with the collaboration with Christopher Yule, I think his name is. He's a Danish producer who worked with Myrkur on this album and is known for being part of the band Heilung. Heilung has a very strong kind of shamanistic, industrial folk pagan aesthetic with antlers and throat singing in old Germanic languages. Myrkur actually teased her collaboration with Yule by posting a photo from his studio on her Instagram saying something like, "Guess whose studio I'm working in?" So I immediately messaged a friend who listens to Heilung and I was like, it's gotta be Heilung. And he's like, dude, that would be pretty cool. I bet it's one of the guys from Heilung. I'm not really sure what my point is here. I just thought it was a cool collaboration. Anyway, let's go inside and talk about the Demon Lover. One of the more distinctive moments on this album is House Carpenter. It's one of only 2 songs in English, and it's the only non-Scandinavian song on the album. Although it is originally Scottish, I believe, so it's got that North Sea connection. It kind of fits the theme. It's a pretty bold choice to include such an iconic song, which has been done by the likes of Bob Dylan, and Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, Pentangle, but I recently threw together a version of it myself and put it publicly on YouTube. So I guess we're all in this together is the point that I'm trying to make there. Anyway, since I'm quite familiar with this piece, I thought it might make a good kind of case study to see how Myrkur arranges a folk song. For starters, there's a million different melodies associated with this song. Like Pentangle does it something like... Well, I could have married a king's first son. And then there's the more kind of major key Americana way of doing it, like Buffy Sainte-Marie does it something like, well, Ned cried he, well, I have returned from the salt, salt sea, and it's all for the love of thee. Probably best known as the Joan Baez way of doing things, which is something like, well met, my own true love, well met, cried he. Myrkur is almost certainly using the Joan Baez version as a starting point. She's a self-professed Joan Baez fan. The lyrics all line up, same melody, bada bing, bada boom. Incidentally, when I slapped my little version of the song together, I too used Joan Baez as a starting point. It's just a really solid version of the song. Also, I hadn't heard the Myrkur version yet when I threw mine together, but I end the song the exact same way Myrkur does. And it's all for the love of thee. Yes, it's all for the love of thee. It's all for the love of thee. I don't know, maybe looping the last line of the song 3 times is an obvious way to end it, but oh, it sounds real good. Myrkur does put her own spin on it. It's got a great groove. It's got that sort of vocal atmosphere, background harmony thing that's all over this album. She also delivers a great vocal performance on this song. I would even hazard to say it's one of her best. However, I have beef with the lyrics, and that should be saying something because I don't eat meat that often these days. In the version that modern performers usually sing, a woman's old flame comes back from the sea, and he asks her to run away with him. They sail away, and the woman bitterly regrets leaving her young child behind, and then they drown. Not the most cheerful song, but a little peek about Wikipedia, and old James Francis Child shows a story about a demon who takes on the form of a woman's dead husband so it can lure her out into the ocean and to her watery doom. So I guess what I have to say is, what the hell? This is a woman who's known for making black metal music, and she skips all the opportunities in this song to sing about demons, hell, drownings, all that stuff. What's more, she doesn't even sing all of the Joan Baez version. She cuts it off before the ship can sink and they can drown. The drowning's one of the most important parts. The core of the song is bitter regret at the point of no return. That's where the tragedy is. If everybody's still alive at the end, the woman can go back and rejoin her family, in theory, I guess. But if she drowns with this regret, that's where the tragedy hits. Now, while I would have enjoyed it if Myrkur had taken a more academic approach, if you will, and used more obscure lyrics and melodies, I don't think she's just being lazy, because cutting short this song fits a pattern for her. You see, Myrkur cut short other ballads on this album. On the last album, she cut Trey Peaker off at like 4 verses. I think it has something to do with how much folk music changes. Whenever you perform a folk song, you're bringing something of your own to it, or you're leaving stuff behind, whether it's just little bits of pronunciation or leaving out verses of the song or changing the ending. So it seems to me that Myrkur has this attitude of accepting that change is part of the process, and that simply singing a few verses of a song is still engaging with the tradition. But again, I'm wildly speculating. But that's one of the fun things about making stuff on the internet, is you get to just assume stuff about people, you know? I guess it's not total assumption, because like there's a rational thought process behind it. I really need to learn to be more confident about my creative works, because they just tend to work out better if you're more self-assured about it. But hey, you know, self-improvement is a process. Well, yesterday was warm and rainy, but today it's cold and sunny. Isn't weather a marvel? Anyway, I thought Folkesange was a good album. At least 2 out of 3 Billy Goat Scruff, if you will, which you probably won't. I appreciated the kind of modern, personal experience, songwriting first attitude, although I would have liked it if she had collaborated with some more virtuosic Scandinavian folk instrumentalists, of which there are quite a few. The album isn't without its rough spots, of course, like the kind of awkward, laggardly flow of the lyrics in Leaves of Yggdrasil. But overall, if you like kind of atmospheric folk music, or if you're into like Norse mythology or paganism, you'll probably dig this album. But what really excites me about Myrkur goes beyond her music. See, she's a modern artist in a world of algorithms and streaming, and she's a lot easier to find than a lot of other Scandinavian folk music. When I first started getting into Scandinavian folk music, it was hard to know what to look for. If you just look up Scandinavian folk music, you're more likely to find these kind of indie folk pop bands like Tallest Man on Earth or First Aid Kit, and they're good music, but it's not what I was looking for. Meanwhile, Myrkur is out there playing traditional songs in her own style, and she talks about bands like Tyriltunga or Bukene Bruse, Njallarhorn, and Folkakrakara, some of my favorite bands that I either had to discover through a painstaking process of Googling and poking through Spotify, or I actually discovered directly through Myrkur's social media presence. So while not being overtly traditional herself, Myrkur is doing a great job of using her platform to pass the torch of tradition into the modern world, you know? And while I think it was a really cool project for her to do a folk album, I'm looking forward to seeing her do more metal music, because that's where she shines best, I think, is when she's combining these different styles to try and create something that's her own. But also I just really admire and relate to her approach to traditional music. Like, she's going much deeper than just saying, oh, this is pretty nice, maybe I'll throw a few of these sounds on my album. But also she seems to be trying to do something new. She's doing a lot of personal expression. I don't know, I guess I'm just a sucker for whenever an artist does kind of hybridized folk music and makes it more than just a gimmick. Granted, I don't love everything Myrkur's ever done, but she's got some great moments in her discography and seems like a really interesting person. Her approach to music and her cultural presence and her role in my own personal musical journey make her probably one of my favorite artists. Well, that's about all I wanted to say, and my cat is in the window looking at me, wanting me to come back inside, so I'm gonna have to call it an end there. Yahoo! Yippee! See you around, folks.